This is the last painting on your list, and I've divided everything such that the sculpture is going to be after this, and the architecture, so that we could have all of those on one side of the midterm, and so that the final can have comparisons between different sculptures, and um, we've come to the very last of the pictures, the paintings for the term, and that's on your list. And this last artist is Hans Holbein, and the painting is called The Ambassadors. Hans Holbein was a German artist. He worked in England for the court of Henry the Eighth. He was the court painter, and he is known for just a hyper illusionism or realism that's is practically photographic, and I'll show you how in this painting is a great example of it, and I can show you in other paintings as well. He must have used some sort of optical device to get it, and you'll perhaps agree with me once you see the close-ups of this. Um, let's start with the fact that he's working for a court, and he paints several pictures of Henry VIII, his the other people or attendants and things, but he also paints the ambassadors who come in, and these two people are from France, and they're French ambassadors, and you can tell they're very wealthy, and they're shown with all of their stuff, and this picture is filled with all sorts of things that have some sort of meaning in relationship to these two people. They're dressed in these costumes, ermine robes, almost like a king, and I don't know what sort of robe the guy on the right is wearing, but you can imagine it's probably the finest materials, and all their accessories are probably the finest of whatever kinds they are. They're leaning up against a table that has a Persian carpet on it, and the upper shelf has a bunch of celestial things, like a celestial sphere and objects or measuring devices for dealing with the heavens. And the ones on the bottom, I guess, refer to things on the earth. It has a globe and music and measuring devices. So those things have some sort of meaning, though they are depicted as if they're just a miscellaneous collection of objects. Let's zoom in. Here. Sorry. Wrong button. There we go. We'll zoom in on this. You can see the stuff on the shelves. This is celestial sphere. You can see the lettering on the globe and all these details. There's a remarkable thing about the degree of detail and the what you can think of as the correct proportions of everything. It looks for all the world as if it were done as a photograph. I mean, this is made long before photography was invented, so it's not a photograph. But it's difficult to imagine how you can get something like this by just looking at something and copying it as a painting. David Hockney's thesis, not just for Holbein, but several artists, is that they used a device, either a convex mirror or or some sort of lens, to project an image onto a surface and trace it. And once you do that, you can get exact proportions of things. And he must have used that to get these sort of things. I mean, this is would be impossible to just look at and copy with this degree of fidelity, or at least fidelity to what we think of as a one-point perspective. That is, when you look at something from a single point, the way a camera does, everything relates to that point. You see everything exactly from that point of view, so it causes everything to look what we think of as a photograph, because photographs have that kind of everything relates to everything else from that single point of view. And since this does, it's hard to think of any other way to have made this than with some sort of optical device. And there are ways to do it. You can look it up. Look up David Hockney's and his thesis, and you can see the kind of things that he would set up that simulate this kind of thing. There's the age of the person written in the handle, the cover of his sheath of his dagger, the tassels. It has all those characteristics we think of as the northern artist would have of super detailed and just a variety of objects and surfaces and textures and materials, so as to show off the artist's skill, and also just to delight the eye with all the stuff. But Jan van Eyck could do that, and many of the northern artists could do that to the degree of that this has, as far as surface detail is concerned. But this is more than just this surface detail. This has two qualities that I'm thinking of that have to be viewed as a projected image. One is the proportions. This is a complex object in space that is absolutely true. And when I think of what you would have to do to create this with a one-point perspective, it would be very complex to do, and to have it just casually tilted in this way, as if it would just happen to be set down on the table like this, just to make it even more difficult to render it in one-point perspective, seems absurd. All of these things, each one is sort of tilted in a different way. And if you can imagine the process of using one-point linear perspective to make this happen, it's just a much greater degree of difficulty to make it happen with everything sort of tilted to each other. That is, they're not in the same plane. They're not in the same. If they were sitting on a grin, they're not making so that every orthogonal goes back to a vanishing point. Each one has its own vanishing point, so that would be extremely tedious to make it happen. Yet it does happen. So the other way to do that would, instead of using linear perspective, would be to project the image in some way. And you can do that. You can set up a still life, and you can put a lot of light on it, and then have the surface that you're going to draw on being in the dark, and between the two have a lens, and the light can focus from the lens onto the surface and project it. And when you project it, you not only get a linear pattern that you can trace and get everything just right in perspective, but also you get to see the thing flattened on a surface. And when you see an image of the real world projected onto a flat surface, it looks different than the real world really looks. And once you see that, you can understand how to copy it, I guess you could say. That is, all of the lighting of every object seems perfectly true, just as well as the linear pattern looks perfectly true. And that is something that I think you need to see it through a lens, or at least you need to see a projection of it in order to get this degree of fidelity. Let me just look at this curve in the pattern of the carpet here, the Persian carpet. That's just, it is so remarkably perfect, and to have done this with some sort of either to do it by eye or to do it with a system, neither of them seem like an adequate explanation. So what's the deal with the skull? When you look at the whole thing, you can see there's a skull splashed across the picture here, and it is distorted in this weird way. If you were to look at the skull from the right, looking down on it with your eye very close to the surface of the painting, you get an image, sorry about that, like this. It looks like a skull sitting on the surface, or on the floor, with it casting a shadow. And looking at it from this way, the floor looks like it's true to the skull. But when you see it this way, the it's way distorted. And this is the thing. There's two ways to do this. One is to do it with a grid. You can draw a picture of a skull, and you can put a grid on the picture of just a squared grid, and you use it to transfer just to another squared grid onto the surface of the canvas. But the grid on the canvas would have to be distorted like this. That is, take the squares that go up and down, the vertical squares. If those are a normal size, then you take the horizontal squares and make them stretched out. And then when you copy what's from one square to its corresponding square from the grid of the drawing, it's you just copy that distortion, whatever it happens to be. So that's one way to do it. It's called anamorphic image. Another way, which I expect is the way he used it, is that whatever means by which he projected these images on here to draw them, to get this photographic look, he used the same device to do the skull. I mean, if you have a device, a lens that takes an image of something and projects it onto a surface, you can just do it from such an angle as to make this happen. Why he did it, I don't know. It has something to do, a skull is a memento of death, and for whatever reason, it's one of those things that they put in Northern artist pictures to talk about, just to have something to have extra hidden meanings and things. But as far as I know, this particular instance of using having an anamorphic skull is unique, or any kind of anamorphic thing within a painting. I don't know that ever happens again, or not in any major painting that I know of. Let's look at just a couple of ones that also seem to have this photographic look to them. This is Sir Thomas More. We have a high resolution image of it. The fidelity of the textures of the skin, and just the proportion of the fingers and the lighting on them, just seems too photographic to me to be anything other than using a device of the kind I was talking about. This kind of fidelity just doesn't come any other way. Here's another one. He can, if you look at the David Hockney thing, you'll see how the artist can set up a situation where he's sort of in the dark and the sitter is in the light, and you can have the sitter, the image from the sitter's face go onto a surface that the artist can draw. And Holbein did lots of drawings like this one, especially when just the face has lots and lots of detail and not very much detail anywhere else. And he just uses that as the basis of his painting. Just look at that. I mean, this is, I expect that he's seen these images projected onto a flat surface and seen how lighted forms look when they're projected, and was able to copy them. Here's another one with the same sort of thing. All these objects in the room, but here's some oddness. If you look at all these objects on the table, like something like this silver thing with money in it, it looks a little odd. It looks like it's not quite sitting on the table, and it's as whatever perspective we're seeing of this device is not the same as the table, and it looks like the kind of thing that happens if whatever device he used to do this pattern on the table and saw these other objects, he used another pass of doing this other object on the table, and he did it. The lens is in a different place, so the perspective is different. You can see even this oval that represents whatever this object is doesn't seem to sit quite on the table. And I think that's an artifact of the system that he used. Now, what's interesting in this thinking of this thesis is when we look back at a picture that's obviously not photographic. It has lots of detail, these patterns that are on. This is Henry VIII, but his face looks almost like a caricature. This looks like something that a person could look at the person with their own eyes and draw it and come up with this kind of image. Even when you consider the amount of detail, like all these the whiskers and things, is greatly detailed, and it's not simply a matter of detail that makes one infer the existence of an optical device. It has to do with what things look like, and this looks like the kind of image of a person you get when you look at them and copy it, and just by just looking with your eyes. And there's kind of distortion that comes with it, and there's a little bit of exaggeration and caricature that comes with it. And this is the king, and he may not, the king's not going to sit for you. You do the kind of work that you did for those ambassadors. He can still, make be very convincing when he's showing the details of all of these objects, but it isn't convincing in the same sense as the other things are, as if they were done with something that makes things look photographic. This one as well doesn't look like he was using anything other than just his eyes to make this happen. So that's Hans Holbein, and he's the end of our road here for the Renaissance and in the North, and for painting. All right, the next thing we're going to is sculpture, and we're going back in time back to 1400 again, and we're going to look through the sequence of progression through sculpture. We begin with this building called Or San Michele in Florence. It is a granary, or it used to be used as a granary and a meeting hall for the guilds. I think these were open. All these arches used to be open, and the inside was just a big open market space. And the guilds, when this thing was built in the 1300s, the guilds had put all these niches in the posts or the piers around the whole building, and in anticipation of putting these sculptures. When they first made it, they didn't do it yet. It took some decades, maybe half a century before they were able to do it, because I think the Black Plague intervened, and it took a long time to recover from that. But in the early 1400s, they started back doing it, and Nanni da Banco will be the one involved in this niche here, and later we'll talk about Donatello as well, which will be in this niche. The guilds would each have created a statue of their patron saint to represent them in these niches, and each guild was a powerful thing, and this is their presence in the city. All right, the first one is by Nanni da Banco, and he's a great sculptor right at the beginning of the century. And he didn't live very long. He didn't make very much stuff, but he was very influential, and it was it's a shame for him to have died early, because he could have given Donatello a run for his money. But this is what the picture, the sculpture looks like from street level when you're looking up at it. And then I have another picture here of what it looks like, straight on. When you look up at it, you can see that it has a Gothic niche, and all these architectural features here look like they're made in the 1300s, and that they have that look. The patterns, the crockets, the arch, all these things look like the previous century. But these sculptures look like Renaissance. They look like people who's interested in bringing back the art of the antique. Now, the originals have been taken out of the ditch and are in a museum. I think most all, if not all, of the original work that was on the church is in this museum. It's a museum of Borsa Michele, and they put copies in their place because they didn't want it to deteriorate in the weather. These are images. They're four saints. They were from I think the 3rd century, maybe the 4th century. Roman sculptors who were martyred because they refused to sculpt pagan idols. And the guild that sponsored this was the Guild of Sculptors in wood and stone. And so they needed their patron saints, I guess, would be these four martyrs. Nani de Banco has rendered them as if they were just like Roman sculptures. He went out of his way to make him look as much like what the Renaissance people thought of what Roman sculpture looked like. They probably had some in the rich people in town probably had collections of Roman sculpture, and he must have studied them because these do look the contrapposto, the character of all of the heads. I can show you some Roman heads to see how close they are, and there are some differences, but this is a remarkable thing. Remember that in the Renaissance, they think of the art of the antique, the Roman world, the Roman and Greek worlds, as the absolute standard. That's the thing to you have to be at least that good. Here's an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. That they may have had not this particular one, but ones like this, big heads that were very much different than the Gothic sculpture that had been done heretofore. They have a certain degree of idealization and individualization. That is, you start with what the person actually looks like, and then make it move in the sort of the direction of the ideal. So it has enough features so it's recognizable, but it also has a kind of a brotherly relationship to each other. In terms of like the way noses are and the way eyes are, the way the Romans and the Greeks before them decided was the ideal face, and then they put the details on them to make them look like a particular individual. And the Romans were great at this. They could make individual faces and keep them in this idealized form. And the folks in Italy, thought this was great. This is the kind of thing we want to bring this back, and anyone who could do this, would be praised. So here's Nani de Banco's version, and this is very much like any of those Roman heads. The way the hair is treated, the way the eyes are treated, the recess of the eyes, this shape of the lid. Let's go back, maybe that, or this. Maybe that's closer. This sort of recess of the eye and the shape of the eye, and also the way the iris is drilled out so as to make a little ring right there. You can see that he's been looking at Roman sculpture. The treatment of the beard here, just the proportions of the face, the shape of the nose, all these things look like a Roman thing, but they also move a little beyond what the Romans did. So it wasn't enough just to be like the Romans, but to better them. Let's look close at some of these figures. You can see that he's individualized them more so and given them some more expression, more life than the Romans would have given them. This one actually looks pretty Roman. But this one, the knitted brow, the worry in his face and his eyes. Of course, these are martyrs who are about to be killed for their belief and dying for what they believe in. So you can expect that this is an emotional situation, and the Italians aren't big on very expressive emotional situations, but just the fact that it has some. When you look at these expression on the face, a little bit of asymmetry, a little bit of more individualized characteristics, a little puffiness there, a little bit of puffiness here, just to make it look a little less like the ideal and more like a real person. The lips parted here. Um, let's go back just a second and see. These faces are completely, emotionless by comparison. So that's Nani Nabanka's contribution. You can see I have some more pictures. This is the back side. The part that's inside the niche you wouldn't see, so it's not finished. Let's take a look at the panel that's just below the feet of these four crowned saints, and see how he treated that. Now this is it's for the Sculptors Guild, and he's shown an image of a sculptor's shop. This would be the kind of thing like the Cathedral Works where Nani de Banco originally had worked. It's like a shop that belongs to the cathedral, and the people in it, their job is to sort of maintain the cathedral and all of its sculpture. So people are working on a spiral column here. They're building a wall, making a puto, a nude puto. But look at these figures. They're not wearing togas, and they're not proportioned like Roman art, like any kind of like Roman relief sculpture would have. They look kind of medieval. They're more realistic than the Gothic style, but they are kind of doll-like in their quality. The proportion of the head to the figure is more medieval than it is Renaissance. So he doesn't have a Roman precedent to look at. He must have had Roman heads to make those heads just above, and also he must have had figures as well in order to get the contrapposto just right, and the way the drapery works against the figure. All these things show that he was a master at that aspect of it, of the full round sculpture. But when it came to the relief, he seems to not have had a model for it, so he had to make something up, and all he had as a model was the Gothic things, and maybe that accounts for why this looks like it does. And we're going to compare this to the Donatello next door, and where Donatello does something different with his predella panel. Donatello's work is St. George, and it was for the Armorers Guild. The Armorers Guild was responsible for the shields, the swords, and the helmets, and armor that you wear, the mail and plate armor and all those things. So this is St. George, who is a saint someone who would wear armor. So he's standing there as a kind of an advertisement for their guild, holding the equipment. The sculpture doesn't have it anymore, but there would have been a sword coming out of this hand, made of probably bronze, and a bronze helmet up here, neither of which are still there. So we can only just imagine what it looked like. But he is in a heroic stance, and Donatello has made him look, going beyond what the whatever Roman model he might have used for a pose or for a look. It has a lot of Roman features to it, a lot of classical looking features, but it also looks Renaissance in that it seems to have more emotion, more realism, more human than the Romans. And the interesting thing, I mean, he seems to have done just as good a job as Nani de Banco is as for his figure here. But when it comes to the panel underneath, what they call I guess it's called the predella panel, that's a relief sculpture. He does some innovating. This is St. George killing the dragon. He's in there's a horse rearing, and he's got his spear there, and or his lance, and he's killing a dragon, kind of a diminutive dragon. And there's the damsel in distress that he's saving. But look at it has a perspective building here carved in, just like Masacho's tribute money had this sort of thing. And if you were to follow the lines of the perspective, they point at George, just as the same ones in the Masacho point at Christ. So he's using perspective the same way, and this is about the same time, using perspective in the same way that the painters were doing. And he's also doing another little innovation in that, you notice that the relief is at different levels. I mean, the figure of George and the horse and the dragon, they're all high relief. So you can see they're much more closer to being in the round. They're projecting farther from the surface, as is the damsel, than other things. But the head of the horse is flatter. It's more into it's further away, and the trees, as you go back down into space here, if we can zoom in a little, those trees are much flatter. So there comes a point where they sort of dissolve into the background stone. In which case, this becomes an atmospheric perspective, and that's something no one had ever done in sculpture before. And this is it's a very Renaissance thing. The atmospheric perspective, the different levels of relief, and the actual linear perspective pointing at a figure. Those are all Renaissance innovations. Okay, next let's look at Donatello's David. David is it's a figure. It's a story that the Florentines used as a symbol of their city, because in the story of David and Goliath, David is the underdog. He's very weak, and he defeats somebody who's very strong by the help of God, and Florence saw itself as being weak in relationship to its more powerful neighbors and very dangerous neighbors who were all out to try to get them. And so they saw themselves as the position of David. So they would think of David as the symbol of the city. And this is the first instance we have of using David as a symbol of the city of Florence. And in it, the image of David is different than the way he's seen in other Davids that we're going to see and compare to each other. This David, this first one, it happens to be the first freestanding nude sculpture since antiquity. No one during the Middle Ages had ever done this, and no one up until this point had ever done it. This is a full life-size bronze sculpture of a nude, and they just didn't do that for 1,000 years. So he had to reinvent this process and use whatever sculptures he had as models, but he's telling a story that the Roman artist never would have had an occasion to tell, and he wants to show David as weak. That is because the weakness of David sort of emphasizes how his victory was the result of divine intervention. So the weaker he is, the more important the divine intervention was. So he looks very effeminate, very graceful. He's kind of doughy. There's very little resolution to the musculature. Look at the back of the hand. There's no indication of the veins, the individual muscles of his arms are not there. Everything is smooth and effeminate almost. This hat kind of looks effeminate, but I'm told that it's a shepherd's hat, which he was a shepherd. So everything is round and smooth, like to emphasize the fact that he himself would not have been up for the task. I mean, looking at the way he's holding the sword, which is probably too heavy for him to pick up, and just this pose that he strikes, and the long hair, and the arm akimbo. He's got the stone in his hand. The head of Goliath at his feet, cut off with a laurel wreath around there as a base. Rather wonderful thing. I like the contrast between the rough things down here, and then the smoothness of his skin, and then the rough things up here. It's a very nice design. Look at some other images of it in different light. Here's where you can see the backside and the side. It's a beautiful thing to be seen, in the round. Is interesting lines all around, and looking at its face here, this is a classical face. The straight nose, Roman nose, the drilled eyes, the lids. Everything looks like a Roman face, except it has much longer hair. It's quite an accomplishment, especially given that he is the first one. That is, in the Renaissance, this was the first opportunity to make such a thing. And they're going to do it later, but the folks later who may do a better job at one thing, one aspect or another, at least they had this as a precedent to, as a benchmark. And there's Goliath down there with you can see lots of little details and things. What's called the chasing stuff that's done after it's cast, or drawing into the metal and make it a little antique reference here, and these patterns here. You can see the wing on the helmet of Goliath is coming up and resting against the inside of his thigh, and he's wearing boots and hat, but otherwise unclothed. So let's compare this to what came just sometime later. They don't know exactly when either of these were made. But sometime later, maybe as much as 20 years, or maybe only 5 or 10 years later, Verrocchio made this David. It's almost the same size, also bronze, and it's Verrocchio was had a workshop in Florence, a really big workshop, and in it he had Perugino, Ghiberti, and Leonardo. So, he taught the artists who were going to be the High Renaissance. So he was a very important figure, even if he didn't himself make anything. But he did. He made several works of sculpture, and some notable paintings. One of which Leonardo painted some on. But anyway, Verrocchio here is made a David that is of a different character. It's like he's telling the story in a different way, or he's even telling a different story. In this version, David seems a little bit more scrappy. He seems like a young boy. He's a little bit older than the other David, a little bit more mature. He's leaner, and has at least some wherewithal to fight himself. I don't know if Florentines actually saw themselves a little bit differently, like they getting a little bit more confident in themselves, and they needed a new David that represented that. I'm not sure if we can read that much into it, but it certainly does have that effect. He's taken the hat away. He's given him this leather, a bit of armor here, but it's form-fitting, the skirt. I guess this is probably based on a Roman precedent of armor, but it has almost an identical pose. Instead of being akimbo, the hand is on the hip, and he's holding a much smaller sword, something that looks like he could wield. You could see veins and things in his arm. There's much more detail in the surface of the muscles, but also just the shaping of all these things are greater in detail. and he looks leaner, more masculine than the other. It's said, I think Vasari says that Leonardo was the model for this David. Leonardo was about this age when this was made, so it might actually be true. It's a beautiful face, and there you see he's a little bit more minimal in terms of a smaller Goliath's head, which is also goes along with this notion of David being a little more, having the wherewithal to kill him, and no longer the laurel wreath. The face looks much more expressive than Donatello's face, and it's. I'm sure that Donatello could have done this too had he done it, but remember that Donatello was working without any precedent, and Verrocchio had the Donatello as a precedent, so he knew the benchmark he had to surpass when he was making his. There's just this angle of the eyebrows. The fact that his face is not covered up with the hat makes it so that you can see the face and the expression on the face, and the subtleties of the modeling are all moving beyond what the you would have if you were just copying the antique or some particular Roman statue, because they tended to not have any expression at all. Here's what it looks like from the back, and apparently the head of Goliath is removable, so you can take pictures like this. It was gilt on bits, little trim here, the hair and things. I think the Donatello's also had gilding that was, lots of it had been rubbed off. Here they are side by side. You can see it's almost the same pose, but there's just so much more, it's more languid for Donatello, much more feminine and curvy, whereas Verrocchio is more linear, more lean. Seemed to be more energetic, like he's ready to fight the next giant. Also wanted to mention that Verrocchio also did this. This is the doubting Thomas. This is Christ with Thomas here. He's showing the wound because he doubted him. But it's worth noting that this face of Jesus that comes from this statue became the standard face of Jesus. So Verrocchio is responsible for that. When we think of Michelangelo's Jesus and Pietà, it'll be this face. We see Caravaggio's face of Jesus and the Calling of St. Matthew's. It's this face. So this is the standard when you think of what Jesus looks like in pictures and in art. This is where it comes from. He's also responsible for this, and this is a Florentine woman. And when we looked at the Parmigianino's Madonna of the Long Neck, it refers to this. So the hands of those figures refers to these hands. They are a distorted version of them, but it's this kind of pose that is a takeoff on. So that's the ones as far as we're going to go now, and the next will be Michelangelo.